Hey everybody, what do you think is in my hand? No, it's not a piece of Sony PlayStation left behind by a child. It's the ignition key to a car like this. And again, if you thought it was a Land Rover Defender. No, it's not a Defender. It's a Chinese knockoff called the Jetour. Maybe I am pronouncing this name incorrectly, because frankly speaking, I still have not adapted, and I hope that I will not adapt in the names of Chinese cars, which simply flooded all of Russia. Well, because you know how they are sold in our country and through all sorts of violent methods, with the help of tax increases and all that, we are forced to buy these strange Chinese products. But come on, let's move on from politics to the automobile. I wanted to show you today what this beast is. By the way, this is the Jetour T2. But what is interesting in it, besides the fact that it is completely copied from the car of the legendary British brand Land Rover. But the most striking thing that catches the eye is for some reason a square spare tyre box. By the way, there is a rear view camera here, but if to take a screwdriver and to dig and pick here with this case for about 15 minutes, you will be able to remove it. And what will be there? No, it's not going to be a spare. It's going to be a small roll cage. The question is, if you have a flat tire somewhere and you want to dismantle and rearrange the whole thing, but believe me, judging even by what I have seen on YouTube, it is a very difficult procedure and it will take you a lot of time. Can you imagine that somewhere in Siberia you have a flat tire, the frost is 40 degrees, and how do you do all this work? And it seems to me that at 40 degrees in the frost perhaps, this spare tire, it must be torn off very hard, this very cover. It seems to me that all of this in the cold can simply fall apart, split. Well, okay, it's the first impression, but honestly speaking, I all the time has counted, the wheel is round, so Kofro Zapasaski should be also in the form of a circle. But we have it square. Well, the Chinese have such a logic of their own. Asian. This is a useful option, by the way. Such a stop rear door shock absorber. It's not badly done. But in general, there is a whole epic about the rear door. I think that if they were selling these cars in America, Dogdemur, he would probably spend 3 hours on it. But now I'm going to show you the back door. You'll understand why I'm so skeptical about the whole thing. But the thing is, the back door has a bunch of functionality. It is unclear again for what purpose, but nevertheless, as you can see, there is a lot of stuff in the trunk here in general. I understand that the Chinese have decided that if you have a lot of pockets in the luggage compartment, then your car will definitely be bought. Here we go. If you press question. Why is there a cup holder in the trunk lid? Ideally, you've probably stopped, taken the groceries out. You took the cups out, put them in there and had a little picnic. You can laugh about it, you can laugh about it. These options are very questionable. This, by the way, is an emergency stop sign. And here we have, I understand, the manufacturer. It positions this as some kind of moments in which you can put a cell phone and put some kind of speaker. Okay, a little later, I will tell you how much this car costs. But the most basic point is with the Chinese. They're always interested in copying something. And then, what they have copied, they start to adapt it to their market somehow. Why do you need these bright green inserts? I just don't understand it, and probably never will, but nevertheless, they are here. The most important feature of Chinese cars is, as usual, a dozen monitors in the cabin. Why so many of them? But also, a bunch of all sorts of glowing buttons. Here they've gone further. The very name of the brand on the front grille is also illuminated. As in principle, everything in the Chinese. By the way, when you look at Korean cars after Chinese cars, Koreans already look like classic automakers. And in principle, they do look solid. But nevertheless, the Chinese, and here is this brand is produced since 2018. Think about it. 6 years. Would you give your money for a car that's only been in production for 6 years? First time. People decided we were going to make cars and started making cars. But here, this sub-brand is owned by the Geely brand. It is, of course, a brand with a longer history, but again, if you look, for example, at European or American cars, it is, to put it mildly, the period that some Mercedes spends on testing one model. Here, this period of time is, in general, the entire history of Chinese automobile manufacturing. Well, in general. But interestingly enough, all the parts, for example, the mirror, it weighs nothing at all. I mean, it's like fluff. I mean, it's very, very light. What does that tell you? It suggests that it's probably made of some kind of sub-material. Well, accordingly, these sub-materials are usually made of recycled materials. So, accordingly, what's next for quality? Well, again, we have no statistics on this model. Right now, everyone is raving about how good it is. As a rule, paid bloggers, paid by Chinese manufacturers, rave about it. Everyone says, what a cool car. But you realize, a knockoff Defender can't be a Defender. No matter what you do to it, it's not Defender. These, by the way, are the letters on the grille that are on fire. I mean, they've got lights in them. But, of course, there is a plus in this car, is that it is not particularly expensive. But I'll tell you about the price a little bit later. But then again, who likes all these gadgets? Well, you're probably right here. I mean, if you like. Here's a question. Again, there's, well, only one question for this car. But nevertheless, as if, well, they are. I'll unravel them. You went off-road somewhere in a wild forest, and how will you use all these monitors and gadgets there? You don't. Why do you need them? And why are you overpaying your money for it? Is that the right question? I think it's quite right. On the quality of the finish. The chair is made of some kind of eco-suede. Eco Alcantara. I don't know what to call this material. But to put it mildly, the look of it is not very expensive. In general, the plastic looks more or less so, at the level of Volkswagen Polo. But here, of course, the price is not Volkswagen Polo, but nevertheless, everything is soft enough. Doesn't creak, but the car really doesn't drive. I honestly haven't driven it once. It would be interesting to hear comments from people who have, well, and how in general to assess on a 5-point scale how good a purchase. The truth from those people who have already given their money for cars. As a rule, it is embarrassing to admit that you made a mistake. That's why I don't think anyone will directly write the truth. If such people are found, I think that we will all be very grateful to them, because it would be very interesting to find out this question. And then there's the usual bunch of USB connectors and stuff like that. Basically, it's all great if you use the car in the city. If you use the car off-road and somewhere in the woods, in the fields. I think it's very much a question of whether it's necessary. I've said this before, but I'm overwhelmed with emotion. I can't get that question away from me. Regarding his off-road history. From what I understand here, it has all-wheel drive, but the all-wheel drive isn't exactly permanent. It sort of is. And there's no exact information anywhere. It is only necessary to go to an official dealer and you will have to spend half a day on it. As I understood, this car has a front drive, but if you have some history with slippage, the rear wheels are also connected. At one time, the old Mercedes had this system. On the 124 model, on the 210 model, it was the same there with this drive formula. About the engine. Here, finally, the Chinese have put at least a 2-litre motor because they usually almost all cars have a 1.5-litre motor. This has 2 litres, 245 horsepower. That's not bad in principle. Just now he showed the underfender, but judging by its thickness with noise insulation in the cabin will not be very good. But then again, there's this. We all know that the Chinese are very actively rusting. That is, corrosion is a sore spot for them. As you can see, there is no anti-corrosion treatment of the body from the factory at all. None at all. Accordingly, it is also necessary to invest in it, because it seems to me that if you do not do it, then in about 3 years, this car will simply rot. I once showed you a brand new Cherry, so the new car already had rust under the hood. Taking into account the way the Chinese produce their cars, and in general, in principle, of all the variety of Chinese brands, there are only 3 or maybe 4 manufacturing plants. All the rest is just manipulation with brand names. In fact, they are made by only a few factories. There's no rust-proofing here, and for nothing. I don't think that's a plus either. But about spare parts, you yourself know how the Chinese make their stuff. It doesn't matter if it's a car, a machine, or some other thing. First, you buy it from them. For example, a machine. Then it breaks down after some time. Well, usually as the warranty runs out. After that, you wonder what to do with it. Then, you start to find out that there are no spare parts for the car, or the machine, or the equipment. Well, usually there aren't. If there are, the price tag is going to be very, very expensive. Well, they simply put you in a position to buy a new thing. This is how Chinese automakers work. By the way, a 12-year-old Maserati, there is a car in detailing. As you can see, the owner covers it with a protective transparent film. And that is right. So, the Maserati, well, you see, yes, of course, the class of the car is different, but it looks much better in terms of design. But when you look at a Chinese car, especially under the hood, when you see some plastic parts, some tubes, you begin to think they look so very fragile that they are about to fall apart. Although the car hasn't even been driven anywhere yet, but I hope it's just the appearance. Because as I said, there are no statistics on the reliability of these cars. And let's move smoothly to pricing. So, here is such a car on average costs in the neighborhood of $40,000. Well, when you have looked at all this, think whether it is worth to give your $40,000 for this miracle of technology. On the one hand, you have a new car that looks a lot like a Defender, but it's not a Defender. Second point. Maybe add another $10,000–15,000 and buy a used Defender, and everything will be generally good, and you'll be happy, and you'll have an aluminum body, you'll have 50 years of history in there, and just a full-blown SUV that's sure to go where you want it to go. I posted a video of a test drive of a 90 Defender specifically, by the way. Well, I drove it through some very deep water on it, exactly on the Land Rover proving ground. And believe me, it did very, very well. And yet, for all that, it's a very comfortable car. I honestly don't know what the Chinese will offer. If you go to the same testing ground, which was once near Moscow, and it was the Aguara Land Rover that contained it, it seems to me that this Jetour will sink there. Well, again, I repeat, I personally have not driven this car yet, but as soon as there is an opportunity, of course, I will try to ride it. But let's summarize and finalize all this video. On the one hand, you have an exact Defender clone. On the other hand, you have an average price for it. It's not expensive, it's not cheap. But on the other side, you have a Chinese product that will likely start losing value every year, minus 20% once it leaves the showroom. Do the math. In 5 years, the near value of your car will be 0. Do you want that? Personally, I don't. That's why I drive other cars. Thank God that's okay. But who wants to buy such a car? Of course, I will not discourage, but with the current abundance of these Asian handicrafts, it makes sense to look at something else. But if you really want to, then of course you can't limit yourself. But now, I decided to go through the showroom. Write in comments how similar it is to Defender. I think it's 85% a copy of the Defender and inside too. I've discovered an interesting thing. There's a thing on the right side of the door. It's made with a magnet. Let's get to the details and then we'll come back. Because that way, you won't know what we're talking about. I'll say it again. All the parts that we've got here, they're very light. But the question naturally arises as to what they're made of. I'm certainly not a harsh opponent of Chinese cars, but you've got to face it. They're not worth what they're worth. On a magnet, it should go exactly where it's supposed to go, but it doesn't. It's always on the wrong side. I'm fixing it with my finger right now. But then again, this thing, it's telling, isn't it? I mean, of course, everyone will start to write why you cling to such insignificant details. But it's the insignificant details that make a whole. I think that if I was really hard up, I'd have to get Doug Demore from America. I think he'd be a big help. And he and I could figure out what's what, where it is, and how it works. I'm waiting for a comment from Doug Demore. Doug, be sure to email me. You and I will have a chat about this Chinese car. And that's it for now. Enjoy the show. Write in the comments, how do you like this model? It will be very interesting.